All right. Welcome, everybody. As people start coming in, thank you so much for being here today. Hey, everybody, come on in. We're going to get started in just a couple of minutes. If you're just joining the call, welcome. I see everybody's here. Oh, yes, everybody's coming in. Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, everybody. Hey, everybody, I'm Allison. We're just going to wait just a couple more minutes and let people get on the call, and then we'll be happy to get started today. I'm so excited for you guys to be a part of this today. I think we've got a lot of people in here, so I'm going to go ahead and just start kicking it off, and then there'll be some other people coming in as we go along. Good morning and afternoon, depending on where you are in the good old USA. I am Alison Mullins, and happy to have everybody on this wonderful Wednesday Wi-Fi Power Hour that we've got here for you. Today's session is entitled The Art of Storytelling, an insider's perspective. And we have three amazing panelists for you all today. And as women in flooring, and of course, we have some allies, I think, on the call today. It doesn't just have to be about women, but as the group, Women in Flooring and leaders of this industry, we all know how important a brand is in relationship to selling and marketing and building relationships with customers. And just behind every successful brand, there's a story. Now, I really wanted to moderate today's session because in both of my books that I've published, storytelling is a big part of it. The first one, I talked a lot about expertise and how important it is that we identify expertise when we're working with others, especially in terms of sales. And then in my second book, when I talk about branding, storytelling is the foundation behind all branding and communication. It's literally the lifestyle narrative. And today we get a chance to bring three true powerhouse industry perspectives.
If it's a water holder, it might last 6 months.
Uh-oh, may I ask everybody to keep your mic on mute for me while we get this power hour going. No worries, but we got it here for you today. So instead of reading the biographies of our three wonderful panelists today, let's see, Andrea or Maddie, do you want to go ahead and go to the next slide? Perfect. Let's do some introductions as well. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Wi-Fi. So the women in floor covering industry, better known as Wi-Fi, was started in 2021. And our mission statement is to attract, educate, and empower all women in the floor covering industry, as well as our allies and men. Go ahead, Maddie. Want to introduce our board of directors today. All these beautiful faces up on the screen. Everybody who is pictured here has a huge, intricate asset involvement into the success of our women in floor covering industry, women in flooring industry. And we want to say thank you all for your wonderful and honest participation, as well as spending this time for free. It is a volunteer network, right? Our professional development committee, I'm thankful that I'm on this committee this year. Once again, we want to say thank you to all these wonderful ladies who just give up their time on a regular basis to help make the programming that we have available in Wi-Fi readily available and plan. We're also starting some subcommittees. So if you're interested in getting involved in Wi-Fi, why don't you just give us a shout in the chat and let us know that you would like to get involved, and we might find a subcommittee or other committee to put you on. I want to say thank you, of course, to the corporate donors. Wi-Fi is a registered nonprofit, and without these wonderful donors, so much of our programming would not be available. The scholarships would not be available. So we are very, very thankful to have these companies and their alliance with our programming. The mentorship program has officially started. And my co-chair this year, I was one of your chair people. Hi. In case you probably already know that. Jennifer Roundtree and I got to whip this thing into shape for the spring session. But we're going to try something a little bit different. If you are interested in becoming a mentor or a mentee and you're ready to sign up for that today and pre-commit, you can actually go to the link on our website and go ahead and pre-register. So if you want to participate this fall, take a minute and check that out. We have a scholarship program. Oops, one moment. Yep, we have a scholarship program thanks to those wonderful sponsors. And this program amazingly will allow for money for your continuing education. So whether it's if you're a student joining us today who wants to continue that degree, certificate, or certification, or if you're already in the professional field and you want to seek an additional certificate or certification program, we can give you up to $250 to $1,000 a year. It's pretty amazing. This is a question that comes up quite a bit for us in Wi-Fi. Do we get together? When do we see each other? How do we see each other? Well, I'm here to tell you that we try our best with these online power hours every single month. We very often have significant events during trade shows, such as panel discussions and fun little industry events. And there will very often be some other conferences around the country where you might find Wi-Fi's presence. So I encourage you to check out the website and see where we're going to be next. Speaking of where we're going to be next month, you get a chance to rock your LinkedIn profile. And I'll show you how to find that information here in just a moment. But there again, Wi-Fi is also going to be in Charlotte at the WFA Expo. And we're expecting everybody to see so many people at Coverings this year, which is back in Orlando. Super excited to get down to Florida. So here is a snapshot of our website. And if you would like to get involved, yes, you could put that information in the chat. We'll collect it for you today, but you can also go right here to get involved. Sign up for the newsletter. There's your mentoring link, a calendar schedule of where we're going to be for our gatherings, and of course, these monthly power hours. This is your chance, if you want to take a moment before we get into the session, to go ahead and scan this QR code to follow Wi-Fi on socials. I've got some snapshots coming up that are going to show you all the activities that we see on our social networks, such as LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, etc. And here's that example. When you follow us on social media channels, you get to see those upcoming events, talk about our new leadership program. That SEAL program is so fantastic. We've got Aaron West, who is also going to be taking over some of the Power Hour organization responsibilities. We're so excited to have Aaron involved there. And lots of pictures of the activities as we move about the country. So without further ado, the art of storytelling. Again, I'm very excited to have these three panelists with us here today, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves because I think with a little bit of a story is the best way for us to kick off. So Tanja Kern, who is Associate Publisher and Editorial Director of Floor Trends Magazine, why don't you kick us off?
Thank you, Alison. I would say my path to storytelling in the flooring industry wasn't exactly conventional. I started with a journalism degree from Northwestern, and I built my early career writing for design and lifestyle publications like Better Homes and Gardens and Los Angeles Magazine. And I slowly transitioned from full-time editor to freelance writer for many publications until the Great Recession hit in 2007. My freelance opportunities really quickly dried up after almost 10 years writing. I loved storytelling, but I didn't know what my next step was going to be. I didn't quite find my niche yet. So an opportunity came up where I was able to take on a freelance writing project for a major tile importer. They needed help writing descriptions for new launches and kind of create ways that would descriptions that would resonate with their designer and retail and homeowner customers. They put me in a room with a stack of samples and lots of sample boards and tiles, and I basically had to create or make up stories for each of the new collections. And as we spoke, I noticed something interesting. Often they struggle to convey the stories behind these great products. And some of these products were really cool. Some of them were not so cool. And we needed to create a way to make them more interesting. So luckily, my writing resonated. I was able to help them create marketing copy that they used on the website, brochures, and training documents. I helped them with PR and social media. And what fascinated me and what opened my eyes to storytelling in this way was that the right story can really transform what's a functional building product like tile or flooring into something really emotional and meaningful. And so today in my role, I get to work with manufacturers and retailers across the industry. And I really love how we get to see every day firsthand how storytelling bridges the gap between big business and human experiences.
I can't wait to hear a little bit more from you, Tanja, especially like how do you get the story out of people sometimes? I can't imagine that that's an easy job. But let me introduce Kris Stanfield, and we'll get back to you in just a few minutes, Tanja. So Kris is the Director of Content and Creative Marketing with Residential Brands at Shaw Industries. That's a huge title. It's been tripping me up this whole time. So Kris, why don't you tell us a little bit more about you and a story that you have to share with us?
Sure. Well, so just a little bit about my background. I call myself the one-trick pony. I have been in messaging and communications and storytelling since the beginning. 2000 started my career. I actually started locally in Dalton at the Chamber of Commerce, where I spent several years embedded in the community, helping those local businesses understand some of their stories and tell those. So it was a really great start to my career. I also spent a little bit of time working at the local newspaper, which is always good route building, and I would call it building your grit for storytelling. That didn't last super long. And then shortly after that, I made the move to corporate. So I have been with Shaw for 13 years. I've worked on both sides of the business, commercial and residential. So it's just been a really great broad experience. And similar to Tanja, I've had the great opportunity to work have my hands in all aspects of communications and content and storytelling. So whether it was developing product stories, product collection stories, which is really, heavy on that romance language to bring a product to life, or just more kind of what I'll be talking about today, but how do you create stories for sales based on products or initiatives or services we want to shout, and then make that relevant for not only our sellers, but also the customers we serve. So it's just, and I'll say my approach is a little bit of a hybrid of journalistic, and then I'm very intuitive. So a lot of my stuff kind of comes from this unknown place, and I've learned in life to socialize that. So that's probably my story to share. Is it took me a long time in my career to understand the power of, just because you create a story, it may not be relevant. So you've got to look at it, but emotionally disconnect from it, and that's okay. And sometimes you have to kill it and start over. I think I was very prideful earlier in my career, so it was kind of mid-career before I understood sometimes you just have to revise, pivot, socialize with people. That was another piece where I kind of held things to my chest a lot, but now later, and that gives you so much more, I would say. You get buy-in from your internal peers, but you also get new perspectives to make the story stronger. So those are two things I just recommend everybody on the call. Don't overlook. You drop your ego a little bit, and don't be scared to change the story and socialize it.
And listen, right? Active listening. That's what I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely.
Like how important it is for us to not only have this like one-sided view when we're trying to tell a story and communicate, is that we actually have to kind of respond and listen to what's coming back to us in order to keep going or pivot, right? I think those
Yes.
are two big deals. Well, that's awesome. I think you and Tanja both, have this sort of happy medium between written storytelling and visual storytelling, and content marketing in both that picture perfect way and then also through words, which is, very classic to say the least. So last but certainly, most certainly not least, I want to introduce everybody to Mr. Scott Humphrey, the CEO of our World Floor Covering Association. Welcome, Scott. And what have you got to tell us this morning?
Thank you, Allison. I must admit, I feel like a stowaway on the Wi-Fi ship out here. But I'll tell you, it's a passion of mine. I get the privilege of working with Andrea and Maddie on a regular basis, and I have triplet daughters, and so giving them the opportunity to excel and learn more about what it takes to excel is very important to me. I thought I would share with you. I'm going to go way back. I'm going to go back to my childhood and share with you what it takes to become a CEO, because I look at where it all started. So I grew up in a trailer park behind the post office in Chatsworth, Georgia. They had a very large parking lot. I have two older brothers. One is 2 years older than me. One is 4 years older than me. And as I grew older, it was very important for them to involve me in whatever they did. I loved if they asked me to play a game or be involved or play baseball with them. It was always a big deal. So one day, my brother Mike, who is a successful construction business owner in Atlanta, Georgia, who would hate the story if he knew I was telling you right now. He came to me, he said, "Hey, you want to hang out with me and Louie? Louie's my oldest brother, Mike's my middle brother." And I said, "Really?" And they said, yeah, we got a game we'd love for you to play. And I said, "Well, great, what is it?" And they said, "Well, it's called Catch That Guinea." And I said, "Okay, I don't know that game. How do you play it?" And they said, "Well," Mike said, "Louie and I both have bikes, but you don't have a bike. So here's what we're going to do. You run around in the parking lot and we try to smash you between our two bikes." And I said, "Is that fun?" And they said, "Oh, it's lots of fun." I said, "Oh, okay." So I was pretty quick and I ran around for about 20 minutes without getting hit. Mom had made us each a little sack sandwich. And so I sat down to eat my sandwich. And the next thing I knew, I had a tire track on the front and a tire track on the back. And I'm, crying like this. I'm going to tell Mama that y'all did that to me. And my brother Mike said, "Okay, but if you tell, we'll have to quit playing and we're having a good time, right?" And I said, "Oh, yeah." And I went back to playing again. So the lesson is you don't have to be the smartest one in the room if you're a CEO, but you better be surrounded by people who are.
Well, tell us a little bit more about what is a day in the life like of Scott Humphrey?
It's crazy these days. I was telling you guys before everyone came on that I'm in the midst of travel. I do a lot of lobbying in Washington, D.C. on behalf of the industry. So I was up there a few weeks ago. Last week, Shaw Industries asked me to come in and help facilitate their leadership program, SALT, an amazing leadership program. We were down at Callaway Gardens all week. I'm in Dallas, Texas right now, meeting with the Informa Group as we prep for Surfaces next year. And then I leave on Monday for Phoenix, Arizona for our annual board meeting with the WFCA. So a lot going on.
So, in your role as a CEO, it is all about advocacy, is what I'm hearing. You are playing the stakes for what happens in our industry and does that also incorporate, helping with regulations and code, or, you said you're up in Washington, D.C. What do you lobby for with our industry?
Well, in the most recent visit, we were lobbying on the tariffs. Obviously, that's a big topic if you look at what's happening on Wall Street and in the media today. We talked about immigration. Immigration has the likelihood of having a very negative impact on us because about 40% of all the people who have come into installation in the flooring industry over the last 5 years came across the southern border. So if you begin to ship them all back, you look at a problem we already have with a lack of installers and you multiply that. And then the pass-through tax, the Trump tax, they call it, making sure that that gets renewed. So we have that 20% break for S Corps. Those were three big issues we discussed.
Okay. Maddie, I'm going to have you go ahead and go to the next slide for me here. We're going to kick right off with some more content in this conversation. So, the next part of this storytelling, because we're talking about sales and marketing today, and myself being what I probably a self-proclaimed marketing guru, definitely a sales expert. the role of sales and storytelling, they just go hand in hand. So, Scott, I mean, gosh, as a lobbyist, as an activist, as a planner, how how does storytelling make a difference in your day to day?
Yeah, I think I became a storyteller because out of college I was a youth minister. And so I was a minister of music and youth. I'm a vocal performance major. I went to school with Trisha Yearwood in Nashville, Tennessee. She made it and I didn't. And I learned to get my point across by helping people better understand who I was. But more importantly, and I think this is what we often forget in storytelling, your story is not nearly as important as the person you're talking to. You people don't care how much you know till they know how much you care. And so you need to be willing to understand, listen to, and empathetically listen to their story. Covey talked about this, making sure that you seek first to understand and then to be understood. And so I think one of the most important things I do is I ask powerful questions. When I get on an airplane, you probably don't want to sit next to me because when you sit down next to me, the first question I'll ask you is, what's your story? And some people don't want to talk and they don't. And other people, I get the most amazing stories I've ever heard from them. And we have amazing conversations. But I love to hear your story because it tells me more about you than if I just said, tell me about yourself. You're going to get the
What kind of
framework.
yeah, absolutely. You're going to get the framework of somebody. I just have to know, like when you were a little kid growing up in school, did you get put in the back of the class, Scott, for talking too much?
Yeah, it's funny. I was a class clown, Allison, until my freshman year of high school. So I grew up in Chatsworth, Dalton area, and my dad was in the flooring industry. He actually owned a carpet mill, and I worked in it from the time I was 7 years old. But when I was a freshman in high school, he changed jobs. He went back to work with the Corps of Engineers. We moved to Tennessee. And one day, Dad picked me up at 4 in the morning and said, "Hey, we're going to school." And I thought, well, I go to school here. He said, "No, I need you to ride with me." And so I went to Tennessee with him. We would leave at 4 in the morning. He would drop me off at the school. He would go on to work. And then I would be the last person to leave school because he picked me up after work. And we did that for about 3 months. And I remember the first day I was at the school, the only thing I knew to do was find out which teachers I did not want to get. And so I asked that question. Everybody said, "Hey, listen, don't get Miss Douglas. She is the hardest teacher. She teaches British Lit, and you just you don't want to get her." Well, of course, who did I get? I got Miss Douglas. And so my job was to sit in the back right corner, as far away from her as possible, keep my head down. I didn't know any of the people either. I was kind of shy, believe it or not. And I sat back there and just tried to be ignored. And one day she asked me to come forward and to read a poem and interpret it. Now, Miss Douglas had no idea that I'd been writing music and poetry since I was 7 years old. And so I knew I could do it. I just didn't want to do it in front of anybody. I was very intimidated by that. And I looked around when she said, "Mr. Humphrey," to see if there were any other Humphreys in the class. And unfortunately, there were not. It was me. And so I went forward. I read the poem. I interpreted it. I remember the reaction of the crowd, the audience, the students, as they looked at me like, "Who is this guy?" And we didn't know this about him. And then I went back and slid into my seat and put my head down again. And when the bell rang, I ran for the door. And Miss Douglas said, "Mr. Humphrey, could you stay behind?" And I said, "Oh gosh, yes, okay." She said, "Do you know why I did that?" And I said, "Well, I assume I didn't turn in an assignment or you were mad at me for something. I'm not sure." And she said, "I did that because I see something in you that you don't yet see in yourself."
Oh, wow.
She
That's
said, "I think you
awesome.
can influence people. I think you can make a difference." And I would tell you that Miss Douglas literally changed my life that day because she began to give me more and more opportunities to get in front of people. And now I'm more comfortable in front of a larger group than I'm a small group. But that was the catalyst.
Well, okay, so I want to hear from the audience for just a minute. Number one, if you have a great story that you just feel compelled to share, put it in the chat for us today. But number two, can I get a raise of hands if everybody has a better knowledge of who our CEO of World Floor Covering Magazine is just by listening to him tell a couple stories today? Because that's kind of the whole point. You know exactly, where this man is from, what his values are, how much he loves to listen to people, and that's pretty impressive. Okay, we're gonna keep it rolling here today, Mr. Scott. And so up on deck is the lovely Kris. I know it got Scott heavy for just a minute, but next, I want to hear from Kris to tell me a little bit more about, your visual marketing, but your copy is as important as your visual perspectives. How can marketing and sales professionals use storytelling to better engage clients or build the brand?
So, great question. It does have several components. I do have notes. You might see me cheating because I can't retain all of my bullets that I put together, but the concept is really straightforward and easy. I would say, the relationship between marketing and sales is critical, and it's the symbiosis, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But I would start with just the importance of a system. In business, even the best story can't stand on its own, right? So there must be a system in place to ensure its success internally and externally. You've got to get buy-in from your internal teams as well as for them to relay it to our external audiences. So I would say for marketing, the key is to focus on creating aligned messaging, consistent communication, and then providing tools to help sales integrate these stories into their interactions with customers. And I know Scott's going to talk about this a little bit, but to his earlier point, when executed the right way, this is going to empower meaningful conversations and customer relationships and grow the business on both sides. So to expand on this, I've kind of boiled down my process to 4 basic components to help guide this approach for marketing.
Everybody get your pen and
Get your
pencils.
pens out. I'm going to have a teacher moment, but that's pretty straightforward. So the first would be start with a clear and compelling story. And this starts with marketing. I feel like the messaging should fit the brand and company values. And I don't feel that's actually imperative. The message should fit the brand or company values. That way it's authentic. It ties back to the brand's position or the company's position. And at the same time, the message should be simple and memorable. Simplicity is key for sales to successfully comprehend and relay their own way with customer interactions. So that's critical. And then I would say creating a connection for the customer is critical. Sales can share, if it's a simple message that they can grasp easily, they can also easily make it their own and share anecdotal stories or past successes they've seen with customers to kind of build that trust in the product or service they're selling. And it'll resonate personally at that point with customers and ultimately consumers or the end user we're trying to sell to. And then I would just say, going back to laddering the stories back to the brand's mission and values, every story feels connected to something bigger if you do that, because if you're constantly reiterating the brand values and the position. So if you can do that at the product or service level when you're telling stories, everything feels connected. So it's really reinforcing the brand purpose and identity, and there's real power there.
So, ironically, Kris, I don't mean to interrupt you, but just to keep playing with this conversation, I talk about branding, and I learned this from a professional, so everybody kind of speaks about it in different ways. But when we're communicating with the consumers or our salespeople, to pretty much no matter who that target audience is at the moment, we're creating 3 sort of pillars of communication, and I was taught to call these pillars aspirational, calls to action. We have to figure out what is the message that we're trying to get across in that particular story. And then the proof and the action that the brand or the product is doing what we say that it's going to do, right? And so for me, in like when we think about a sales tool, I think this goes back to not only the attraction of the consumer, but also that sales pitch and how to hook them, how to actually get your people to buy into your product or to your service, right? And in Wi-Fi, we are a group of people from all across the spectrum, corporate audiences to retailers to salespeople who actually work in that field. So to pull this all together, how would you pull that back together and saying that, laddering the brand's messaging, and how do we get that into sort of like one small package, into a brand voice?
I think that is probably one of the more difficult things. It seems like that should be the cornerstone and what you start with, but sometimes as business grows, or as we have new leaders come in or new teams reassemble, that message gets lost. But it's just the power of reiterating it internally often, and having that
Reinforcement.
The reinforcement. And I'll talk a little bit about that in the fourth component, but it is starting with that mindset of, we have to reinforce our key messages that ladder back to what this business, whether it's, brand or company, stands for. And then I would say, I mentioned that earlier, of just like, you got to lose your ego a little bit. You might have the greatest story in the world, but you're often going to have to pare it back and then check that across. Okay, does this meet our company or brand values? And if it doesn't, you might have to kill part of your story. If it does, great, but there may be opportunities for you to expand on that a little bit, so it's a little more relatable to sales or the audience that you want to relay the message to. But I would say that kind of feeds into the second cornerstone or element that I'll talk about, which is the core story should be relevant to sales, period. It should be adaptable for different scenarios, and sales can use a story to position the product or service as a solution to the customer's pain points. And so that's like, in the mind of sales, how are they going to use this great polished marketing story, but how is it relevant in their space? And then I would say like an add-on to that is encouraging our salespeople to like engage their listening, so that they can respond in a way to the customer that reinforces the product or service, but it alleviates any concern the customer may have. And then, I'd say some of us, we've kind of experienced those breakdowns between marketing and sales, or support teams and sales, because of this very thing. It's important to think through and tackle potential objections up front and consider all of these scenarios, so that the messaging, when you're developing the messaging, you can think through these and build it out for sales as almost a Q&A to help prevent a mess in some cases, or just not clear understanding of what a question might be and how to answer it.
Yeah, I like to think of that as essentially, creating the touch point to the consumer's ego, right? So, and then the salesperson has to actually be able to watch for the signs that whatever that story is that we're telling is hooking and communicating and resonating with the audience as a whole, which is a lot harder to do in marketing, because we don't always see those results right away, but in a transactional situation, a salesperson can be in a sales pitch, and actually watch and see what the reaction is of that story and how it's resonating with the client.
And also, if our client might sometimes be a retail sales associate. So like, we've got to sell into the retailer first as a partner, and then how do we train their sales staff on the floor to understand and buy in, so that they are willingly committed and confident in the story that you're telling, so that they can relay that to the consumer. So that's a great point.
Reliability.
Yeah. And then I would say, just to support this, because, I'm kind of having this dialogue that's pinpointing, it's targeting marketing and sales teams to have this symbiosis. So part of marketing's objective and responsibilities is to keep the story alive by training and resources, right? For salespeople. Training is crucial. They've got to understand the story and why it's important. So we've just constantly got to reiterate that, and then pair it and support it with things like case studies or testimonials, key insights, any anecdotal, successes from the field. This will help ground the story and credibility, and then it'll help salespeople have confidence in this story is selling. We want to keep doing it. And the goal is just to make it easy for them, right? So if we give them tools to use, it will make them easier. It'll make it easier for them to weave that into their day-to-day conversations with customers. And some of this might just be taking time to develop role play scenarios with customers and Q&A to support that, just to equip them for any question that might come their way. And then finally, for this one, it's just it's another marketing to do, but we've got to cross-check that the core story is consistent across all touch points and channels, just so it's
Fluid.
embedded.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. Thank you so much, Kris, for your major points on storytellings and sales tools. Next, we're going to talk a little bit about authenticity and exactly kind of, I think the final point that Kris was trying to get to is that authenticity and the emotional connection, and maybe tell us a little bit about trends in her work, especially in publicity and PR and publications. So Tanja, how in your line of work, how do you pull that story out of the brand that we were kind of talking about in the beginning? And then how do you also make sure that when articles are written and you're directing the communication strategies that, we're not sounding salesy, right? How is storytelling and without being overly promotional?
Yeah, I think a lot of people struggle with that, especially when they're first starting out with writing, not knowing what details to include in their storytelling. And I think anytime you're writing about product or services, it can very quickly go into that promotional area. And people like to use a lot of adjectives and a lot of big claims. And I've found that just kind of like paring it back. And as Kris mentioned earlier, like take your ego out of it. I think the key is to just kind of shift it from being all about the product to like, what is it going to do for in our case, the reader or your customer, if you're writing stories for customers. And instead of discussing all the things that make your product great, focus on how it's solving problems for them. How is it creating a new aspirational reality, like you mentioned earlier, Alison, for someone?
Yeah, I know for me personally, following that 3-pillar method has been huge in my own marketing efforts. And I am a whole lot more comfortable in the aspirational or the proof model than I am in the call to action. I really actually hate being salesy altogether. But and then I had, working with marketing professionals on a regular basis, very often somebody will write something in an article and it's a huge turnoff if it goes very pushy and the story turns into a sales pitch. So, how have you seen that transition, in the industry, and like, are there any trends or clues? How do we know to stay away from some of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key is to build credibility through like authentic storytelling, sharing customer experiences. We're seeing this now, I mean, always through social media. For good or for bad, our attention spans are shorter. So we're seeing a lot of micro stories taking traction where they're really quick, short stories that tell, a before and after, or how someone got from A to B and it solved a problem for them. We're seeing a lot of desire for behind the scenes stories. How did a product get developed? Why did it get developed? Like, people love those touch points where they can kind of hear more about the history of something, and it makes it feel more authentic. I'm sure in your line of work that you come across that a lot too.
Well, yeah, I think like when I wrote that section in my book, I talked about a couple of big brands, that I've worked for in my history, one of which was, think about a big brand like Ralph Lauren. And this has absolutely nothing to do with flooring, but what's nice about thinking about a brand like Ralph Lauren as an example here is, if we really want to look at a brand that has incorporated a story into every ounce and every piece of not only merchandising, but their print ads, that I think it's a great neutral example. It has nothing to do with, it's more in the fashion industry, but at the same time, think about the polo ads, think about the price points, think about the aspirational approach for people who wanted to buy polo shirts in the 90s, and like what Ralph Lauren did for mass merchandising stores like Macy's and even Kohl's, and whatever it was, they put a polo on it and created sort of this pull and sales technique through this master story of English polo riding, you know,
It's a fantastic example.
wealthy. So anyway, not to take over your time here, Tanja, but what about, you know, nowadays we certainly don't have quite the pull for such apparel brands as we used to. I think that's changed a little bit. But how do you see AI coming into play and the digital tools, you know, either enhancing or hurting the storytelling part of your business?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big AI geek. I love to study it, and I think it's really fascinating. And I think people always say like, "Oh, AI is going to take away jobs." I actually don't believe that it is. I think it's going to level up marketers and sales skill sets more quickly. I still think that it creates a more even playing field, so that if you're not naturally a most amazing writer or videographer or photographer, I think AI is helping to create just an easier time for people to create beautiful and engaging stories. But, you know, AI doesn't replace experience. It doesn't replace critical thinking. It doesn't create voice. You still have to train AI ultimately to make these things work for you and your brand. So I think that we're in a real learning phase, which is really exciting for me. And because gosh, does it amplify the speed that you can go tell these stories, and hopefully the quality, especially when you're talking about newer people coming into the industry. You know, they can still be mentored by people, but all those other skills that you might not necessarily have learned, like video editing and real, you know, writing. Like I have an English degree, but how many people have English degrees nowadays? I think it's going to really make a big improvement for the industry in general.
I totally agree with you. I just did a presentation for a group of fabricators down in South Carolina about this. And, you know, the overall impression that I always want to leave when I talk about it is, it's like, for me, it's like having a helper or an additional employee that I can help me formulate plans, et cetera, into telling a story. And then B, which I think really wraps up what all three of you have talked about, which is like checking the ego. You know, what's really funny is that you can take like ChatGPT, for instance, and if you take your ego out of the equation and ask Chat, what am I missing? What am I missing? Right? You know, it actually is a way that you're backing off of something that you think you know everything about, and using the World Wide Web integration into AI to be able to help complete the package in some places that you may not have been able to see you were missing, you know, a part and a piece.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I can tell you from an AI perspective, I mean, in some ways it's taking away some of the more mundane parts of my job. As an example, say I went to do an interview and I had a 2-hour interview with someone to write a profile. That 2-hour interview would usually take me 3 to 4 hours to transcribe if you had to do it by hand. No longer. I mean, the tools have gotten so good. I mean, you still have to fact check everyone's quotes to make sure it did it accurately, and that takes time, but it's nowhere near what it used to take. We can create such better content, I think, faster because we have tools like that to help us.
100%, 100%. Well, we're doing great on time here, but I want to get to our section 2 part of this scenario. So we wanted to give each of the panelists here today a chance to sort of select a storytelling technique. We gave them some options, and how they could give us a quick demo and how they could actually apply it in their day-to-day. So I'm going to put Scott on the pedestal again for us right now. And Scott gets to tell us a story about transforming a customer who started out as a problem but became a success.
Yeah, I think I had a lot of those customers. I started as a sales rep for Shaw back in 1988. And when I went into the field, the first question I got was, how long are you going to be here? Because everybody that had come before would stay just about 6 months. So they didn't want to develop relationships. I had almost no sales training. I just knew a lot about people. I love people. I always want to impact people's lives. And so here are the steps that I would take when I would go in. I carried a note card in with me when I would meet people for the first time. I would ask them questions, and their answers I would write down. And then I would review that note card before I went in the next time, and I would call them by name, and they didn't know my name for anything, but they never forgot my name again because they were embarrassed that I remembered their name. And I found out about what were the kids into? Tell me about your family. If they're willing to share that information, they'll usually let you know whether they are or not. I was in an area of the country where that was very common. I actually ended up coaching a soccer team for two of my largest accounts, kids who were on the same age group, and they became my two largest accounts. Here are the steps that I kind of went through. I think, and I do this today when I speak, I think you've got to read your audience. You've got to know who you're talking to. And in doing that, you've got to know your own style too. So if I'm adapting my style, I need to know energetically that's going to take something out of me. So you can tell I'm pretty energized. I speak pretty quickly. But if I'm speaking to a group of accountants, I'm going to lower my voice down, and I'm probably going to talk slower because they'll receive the information more that way. So the first thing I do is analyze the audience. I told you that I like large audiences better than small because in a large audience, you'll always find someone who's connecting with you.
That's
And you'll
right.
draw your energy from that one person. In a small audience, if you're not connecting, you will kill yourself trying to get your point across to them. Yeah, it's so difficult. Secondly, I'll go back to what I said earlier. Hear their story. Make sure you hear their story first. You ask the questions, allow them to share their story. Then I would say to share your success in dealing with a similar situation. Now, what I mean by that, understand, I've spoken and sung at a number of weddings and funerals. And in funerals, I know one of the worst things is people walk up to people and say, I know just how you're feeling. No, you don't. You do not know just how they're feeling. What you say is, I've been in a similar situation. And that gives you the freedom to have feelings like they feel, but not to say your feelings are no better than mine, which is how I know exactly what you're feeling comes across. So, and before you share, by the way, there are a lot of great stories. I read all the time. I love biographies, autobiographies. Before I share someone else's story, I always share my own. I think you have to earn the right to share someone else's story. I don't offer the solution in a sales call. I ask them what their solution would be. So after I've said, hey, I've had a similar situation where I went through something very similar, what would you suggest we do right now? What would be the step that would make you feel most satisfied after this conversation? And I ask them for their solution before I offer my own, because if I offer my own and it's not a good one, that conversation's over. But if I hear what theirs is, it may be less than what I was willing to offer. It may be a compromise that allows us both to feel like this is a win-win and not just a win on one side or the other. And then the last thing I always do is I check for understanding. I don't care if I'm giving a speech or if I'm talking to somebody one-on-one in a retail sales floor. I always say, are we on the same page? Do you understand what I'm asking you? To make sure that they do, because we're going to take an action step next. If we don't take an action step, this was simply about building a relationship. But if it's a sales call, there has to be an action step at the end, and I'm going to ask for that. I need to make sure we're on the same page.
I think your points could also be applied to public speaking in so many ways. And then I also think that you just described the framework for every CRM system known to man.
Yeah, that's true.
And
That is
I
true.
don't know. I think you should take credit for designing that. Okay, before we run out of time today, that was so awesome. Thank you so much. Tanja, why don't you tell us a little bit about storytelling structure from a journal perspective, formatting a blog, for instance, or copy. How would you do that?
Yeah, really quickly, I would say in journalism, there's something called an inverted pyramid, and it's a fundamental writing structure where the most important information is at the top, and it works its way down to the details. And that was important in the way, when we used to read paper newspapers more regularly, it gave the editor a way to cut from the bottom up in order to fill space appropriately. If they didn't have enough space to run the whole story, they knew they could cut the last paragraph or a few paragraphs to make it fit in the piece of paper. Thankfully, with digital, we don't really have to worry about it as much anymore. But I think this inverted pyramid structure still works really well because it helps you focus your message really quickly. And
First things out, right?
Yeah, and I can give you a quick rundown of how it works.
Yeah.
Okay, so at the top, there's the lead. It's the first paragraph, and that contains all the essential information that you want the reader to go away with. And it's usually try to create a creative way to basically fit in the what, when, where, why, and sometimes the how. And so that way the reader knows immediately whether it's relevant to them and if it's something that they want to keep reading. Then the second level includes important details. It might be quotes from key sources, additional context, supporting facts, and basically all the things that you need to really understand the story. And then the next layer under that is background information, history about a company or about a product, quotes from other people who maybe are secondary sources, and then any other context. And then the final is just any lesser information that you might still find interesting, but might not be as relevant to the main message.
Wow. Oh my gosh. I get it now. And that's so great. Like, even as a writer, I don't think I've ever seen that kind of formatted, but I did. Wow. Okay. So you guys heard it here first today, because I feel like next time I lay out a blog, I am going to put this on the side of my computer to make sure I sort of have that structure. Thank you so much, Tanja. It's
Sure.
amazing. All right, so last but not least, we still have a few more minutes today. And guys, I want to encourage anybody in the audience to please stick some questions in the chat. We probably are going to have about 3-4 minutes that we could review just a couple of key questions. So if you've got something for us, make sure you put it in the chat. And Kris, I want to hear from you today about putting some emotion into storytelling and how to make it stick. And according to Tanja, it looks like we need to have that in the first big chunk of the article. I love it.
I actually think it can be integrated throughout. And for me, it's, I think you don't really insert the emotion, but you extract the emotion from your audience by using sensory detail. And by that, like, this is my jam. I love it. I do it. I mean, personal writing, business writing, but it can extend beyond the written to presentations or events or speeches. It's hands down my favorite trick, because this is what makes it memorable, and this is what does kind of extract that emotional response. But I can't, if anybody from this call today leaves with anything, I think it's just to kind of practice inserting some sensory detail in the stories you're telling. So no matter if it's written or a presentation or a speech, but it's more intuitive for some people, because some people are just more sensory, and I'm one of those. But for others, you just have to practice. But make it a habit, and then notice the responses you get once you start doing this. But essentially, it's just thinking beyond the word. So how can you, and I think just to set this up, I would say, think of your favorite storybook as a child. I mean, 9 times out of 10, these storybooks were very sensory. I always gravitate to the Eric Carle Hungry, Hungry Caterpillar. It was colorful. It incorporated food. It made you hungry by the end of the book. It was visual. I think some of them had tactile fur and things you could touch. So think about that as you are telling your stories. So if you are even in a customer presentation, how do you have some fun and romance the customer by bringing in some food? Or how do you have music or a playlist or just fun things that make it memorable? You can't always incorporate sound or touch, but you can allude to that in the way you describe something. But if you can bring it in, it's always an extra memorable moment. So I always call it the unexpected surprise and delight. And like I said, it doesn't have to be explained or verbalized. It's just to create a richer overall experience. And it enhances the story you're telling. So story is about all the senses, and this is especially useful with sales pitches. So just explore and have some fun.
Yeah, I definitely think with the sales pitch, I always just like to include personal experiences. And like that's, for me, that's as much of inserting emotion as I want to maybe get. I want to be very careful about too much personal details, right? But at the same time, when I think about marketing, and a visual aid, like if we do think about social media, right? And you're creating a social media post, can you off the cuff think of like, what would be a great way to insert emotion into some kind of a social media visual?
I think, again, it's probably using the senses to elicit that emotional response from the viewer. So maybe it's, a lot of things and a lot of companies are doing this right now in the industry, but it's about moments in the home or moments, with a product around to help tell that product story. So you might have something that's very, it relates to everybody. It's like you show a child reading a book, or you have a puppy in the scene, and you just have that emotion, the emotion with the family in a room with the floor, it's just bringing people back to that. It's not always melancholy, but it's like, it's a sense of the past, or, it just kind of speaks to their heart. So I don't think you don't necessarily have to create an emotional post, but you put something in there that triggers
pull the heartstrings.
Yes, you pull the heartstrings. So
I get it. Oh my gosh. Thank you all so much. We just have a couple more minutes, and I do have some comments and feedback from the chat. So let me go over here and take a look at this really quickly. So let's see. Nicole, one of our mentors this year. Thank you, Nicole Poindexter Wilson. She asks, how do you find the confidence to tell your own story when asked? My mind always goes blank when someone asks. I think I'm going to give this one to Tanja, because I feel like Scott has no problem telling his story. And Kris, you're pretty good too. Tanja, why don't you take this one away?
Oh, okay. I would say for me, it's about preparation. I probably have like the 30-second elevator speech ready for, depending on the place where you are, like you have something you might share with at work, you might have something you might share with potential friends that you're meeting. If you're new to a neighborhood, if you're on a dating app or speed dating, you might have a different version of your story for that area. But I think it's kind of revealing a few of the details that like makes you up in a very quick way.
Yeah. Andrea Blackburn commented, start with the part of your story that makes you smile. And I love that. I also would throw in, and Scott, you're welcome to chime in. I didn't mean to tease you, but I kind of did. But at the same time, I would go back to something that Scott said earlier too, that it's like reading the room. I think my story changes sometimes depending on who I'm in front of, and not in a like I'm being dishonest kind of way, but I got to read the audience a little bit. I got to make sure. And so the confidence factor for me is taking 30 seconds quickly in my brain to go, okay, I maybe don't want to tell this person that part of my story. Let's leave that over here. And we'll just go with maybe this part of the story. And that's clear enough. What do you think about that? Anybody want to chime in? No.
I think that's, Alison, that's accurate. I mean, if I'm talking to, there are some audiences that you want more detail with, and there are other audiences, I'll stay at 30,000 feet.
Oh my God, you're so right. Well, I'm going to wrap this up for us today. We do have some closing slides that I got to get through before we wrap that up. Can I get a big round of applause for our 3 panelists today? Thank you all so much for being here. You're so awesome. And let's see here.
Wonderful.
Good job. You did a great job.
Oh, you're very welcome. All right, I'm going to get the slideshow back up first, Maddie. Maybe it is, and maybe I'm just not looking at the right view. Hold, please. So sorry.
Alison, I also want to know where you got that microphone.
Oh, the good old Amazon. Amazon's
cool.
good for everything. Yeah,
Changes colors.
I do a lot of podcasts, and so this one, there it goes. There's our screen. This one helps me get the best quality sound for some of these recordings.
And it's sensory, Alison. It's got a little sensory vibe to it.
Yes, it's colorful like me. Thank you all so much for being here. And listen, real quick, take a picture of this slide if you work for a corporate office, or take a picture of your phone and maybe go talk to the boss, or maybe you are the boss and maybe you want to donate for Wi-Fi this year and become a friend of Wi-Fi. So we also have a new program where individuals can join for up to $15 a month, and corporate recognitions start at $1,500 a year. Remember that Wi-Fi is a 501c3, so you can write that off at the end of the year. We'd love to have you. And if you had a good time with us today, please give me a good review on the survey. No, I'm just kidding. But please, instead of just taking a picture of this, actually scan this code. We'll take you to a survey, and we do need survey results. especially so that as Aaron takes over as our committee leader for more power hours, we want to bring valid content for you guys. So if you have any ideas, please put that in the notes on the feedback survey. And thank you so much. Oh, you're welcome, Andrea. Next slide. Oh, that's it. Okay. Thanks for being here, everybody, today. Enjoy your lunch hour for the 30 seconds you might have left. We're so happy that you joined us, and see you next time.
Thank you, guys.